Hello and welcome to another episode of the Real EFL YouTube channel, where we look at all of the happenings from League One and League Two, and we look ahead to some of the weekend's games. My name is Gary Hutchinson. I am one of your hosts, and I am joined as ever by Kyle Keneally. How are you doing, Kyle?
I'm doing well, thank you. You might notice the slightly different background today because I am enjoying an hour break in between uni that I've got the chance to record this. So yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Well, I'm enjoying a short break between having a run and going to the gym. So the older you get, you've got to keep yourself in shape. You youngsters wouldn't know about that, but as the bones start, if you don't use it, you lose it once you get over 40. Trust me. So there we go. And somebody who is now going to get a chance to use it rather than lose it is Gareth Ainsworth. So he was previously Wycombe Wanderers manager, did really well, went to QPR and got sacked. He has now been announced as the new manager of Shrewsbury Town, bottom of League One. Now, Paul Hurst was sacked a week or two ago. No real surprise given Shrewsbury's appalling start to the season and what has really been a general decline, I think, since Steve Cotterill left. But the appointment of Gareth Ainsworth has raised some eyebrows, Kyle. Now he's a manager, obviously, we know, you and I know very well through playing for Lincoln back in my day, managing against Lincoln more recently in your day as well. What were your initial thoughts of on Ainsworth joining Salop?
I was, I guess, slightly surprised in some respects. He's a manager who you know what you're going to get coming to the club. We always speak about the Wycombe sides of the past who were very, very difficult to play against. I remember, I think there's a particular game Lincoln played when they basically set up for a draw, probably from early in the first half, and they were time wasting sort of after half an hour, I think, which was probably the earliest I've ever seen a team do that. But when you're at that stage where you're towards the bottom of the division, really struggling, as you've said, you need a manager to come in and get results, and they'll be hoping that is exactly what he does. They've got a very difficult first assignment against Birmingham next Saturday, which I've seen a lot of fans already say, get ready for a 1-0, 10% possession win for Shrewsbury, which I guess would probably not surprise some people. But yeah, as I say, in some respects, it's probably what they need to kind of get them back to the basics, go back to trying to grind out results, and hopefully get them start moving in the right direction again.
Yeah, now another League One pundit who joins me on the Stacey West podcast most weeks, Chris Lamming, commented that he didn't think that the problems at Shrewsbury were down to Paul Hurst. He didn't think that Paul Hurst was a particularly bad manager. Believes the problems were more down to the squad. Now, Gareth Ainsworth might well be a good manager. He might well know how to kill time. He might well know how to do all of that sort of stuff. But it's possible that with the squad that he's got, he's almost working with one hand tied behind his back a little bit. Do you think that he's going to need quite a bit more time, and will he get it with them being bottom of League One?
I certainly think he'll get a fair amount of time at Shrewsbury. I mean, it's quite difficult to sort of say. As you say, Paul Hurst, very well respected manager, someone that you wouldn't be in a hurry to sack, but the results sort of spoke for themselves. So he was never going to sort of stay for too long when you get to that position where you're losing games, bottom end of the division. I'm hopeful that it'll be given time because you've seen what he's done in the past. If you take QPR sort of aside, he did really, really well with Wycombe, took him into the Championship during his spell. So there is proof of what he can do. It's just whether he does get that time. And obviously, he'll have a window coming up within the next month and a half to get his own players in, start to sort of shape the squad. And from there, you'll definitely be able to judge sort of what he's all about and the results he'll be able to get.
Yeah, of course, that January transfer window's looming large. You said a month and a half there, and I thought you got your maths wrong. I forget that we're in the middle of November. So he is going to get a transfer window fairly quickly, and I suppose it's better for Shrewsbury that he's in now and given a chance to assess his squad rather than they sack him around December. I mean, from a personal point of view, I think this is the best appointment they could have made to give themselves every chance of getting out of the division. You know, when he left Wycombe, a year or so ago, or maybe a little bit longer, he was hot property, and he'd been linked with a lot of jobs. His style of football means that he was never going to be linked with teams top end of the Championship. And I think any other English manager who had taken Wycombe from the lower reaches of League Two through League One, and I remember that game you were talking about earlier, it was 0-0, it was around 2018, they needed a point to go up, he was pragmatic, came for his point and got it. They went up then into the Championship, I think in COVID season, and it was a little bit questionable as to whether they got the staying power to do that or not, but he put Wycombe into the Championship. So I think he's a great prospect, albeit I know he's nearly 50 now because he's similar age to me, so he's getting on a little bit in some terms. But I think that it's the best signing they could have made, not just because of what he can do on the pitch, but Shrewsbury feels really fractured off the pitch at the minute. I follow Salopcast on Twitter. Great guys, if anybody wants to follow a Shrewsbury Town podcast, they're the boys to do it. And there was a real feeling of, they don't want the owners, they want the owner out, the squad isn't good enough, they lack heart. What they need is to be galvanised off the field. And I think that's something we've seen in the past at Lincoln as well, isn't it? Do you think it's important to get the fans back on side? Do you think that is actually an issue that clubs need to address sometimes?
Yeah, definitely. And I don't think there's a massive amount of managers who can do that. We'll get onto one later on in Danny Cowley, because that is what he's particularly great at doing. But yeah, there's not an abundance of managers who can come to a team, sort of make it their own and take them in a new direction. And yeah, it is definitely important. As fans, that's always crucial. You want a manager who comes in who will love the club. You always just respect that when times become difficult or when they're doing well, they might move on. But you want a manager who will stay for the long term. And I think if he's given the right resources, which, as you said, there's trouble off the pitch, so it's not going to be potentially as easy as that. But he could be a manager who's there for a fair amount of time, and definitely has the potential to turn the club around. And it might not be this year; they might struggle, they might end up getting relegated, but you've got to look at that longer term plan, and I'm hoping that is what Shrewsbury have in mind here.
So we're talking about the importance of supporters, and that brings us on nicely to our first game of the weekend, because Gary Caldwell this week put out an impassioned plea for Exeter City fans to get behind their team in the face of extreme adversity. Now, we're going to talk about Exeter City and Lincoln City. I think it's the first time we've talked about Lincoln on this show, with us both being Lincoln City fans, so we'll try and be impartial. But the big news around this really is Exeter not being allowed to cancel the game despite having 3 international call-ups. So Josh McGuinness was called up. Ilmari Niskanen has also been called up. And then this week, Kamari Doyle has also been called up to England under-20. He was on the standby list. Now, there is an irony here that he was called up to the England under-20 squad because Nico O'Reilly pulled out injured and then played against Lincoln on Tuesday night in the EFL Trophy, but we'll leave that there. Now, across the team, that's 31 starts altogether across those 3 players. It's 5 league goals across those 3 players. Gary Caldwell wants the fans to be the 12th man. I mean, they probably need to be the 9th, 10th and 11th, given that they're losing 3 first-team players. Before we even go into the game, what are your thoughts, Kyle, on this? Should he have been allowed to call the game off at short notice?
I really think this one's difficult, to be honest, because I was sat there thinking more of a fan's perspective, particularly. Now, this game was chosen for Sky, so it's a 12:30 kickoff anyway. If you've got Lincoln fans who are probably leaving well before 6 a.m, may have booked trains, etc., to have a game cancelled on the Tuesday before a Saturday game would be unforgivable in terms of the amount of money that you lose. Probably hotels as well. You'll get fans going down for the weekend. Exeter's quite a nice place to go. So from that perspective, you can't really wait until the game. I do feel for Exeter though, because losing a 3rd player, and we know how they usually get 3 cancellations and then you're able to postpone the game. But when it is so short notice, I think you're allowed, is it 5 or 6 days before, when they just missed that cut-off. So as I said, I do feel that it's particularly harsh on Exeter, and Exeter are the losers here. But if you flip the scenario and it was the other way around, I do feel that the Exeter fans would be say they were coming to Lincoln, they would be annoyed at having lost all the money they've spent on travel to get up here. So I'm in two minds about whether this game should have gone ahead or not, to be honest. But that rallying cry has kind of given them a bit of a, not an excuse if they lose the game, but it also gets them behind the team, creates an intimidating atmosphere. And it's always a good atmosphere down at St James's Park anyway. So from their perspective, they'll be hoping that they can use this and use that as motivation to go and get a result against Lincoln on Saturday.
Yeah, I think it's really clever from Gary Caldwell, personally, because I think he's essentially protected his team from a defeat. If they get beaten now, there's already that narrative of, well, the EFL cost us this, or the FA cost us this. But if they get a result of any description, it's look how brilliant we are, look how great we are. And the truth is, this Exeter City side actually are a decent side, and they're probably in a slightly false position. There's a lot of teams kind of bunched up from kind of Wrexham down, which are pretty much for muchness, and Lincoln sitting in fifth probably wouldn't be there if it wasn't for a couple of late goals, given how tight the division is. Now, some numbers on Exeter. They're fifth for crosses into the box. They're fourth for corners, so they love to get the ball in, but they're going to be aiming for a Josh McGuinness type to kind of flick-ons or win those balls, so he's going to be a big miss. Their XG is very similar to Lincoln's at 16.46. They're actually slightly better, and they've conceded the joint fewest goals in the division at 10. I mean, this is a really solid unit, gaining momentum. I mean, it's a tough game for Lincoln, who, in terms of league positions, look to be the better side, but there's just a hair between the two, isn't there?
Yeah, as you say, I think there's only 3 points difference between the two sides, and I believe Exeter have a game in hand on Lincoln. I know it's early stages, so you can't always convert game in hand into 3 points. But yeah, you're looking at a side that were very good defensively. They had that run start of October, end of September, I believe, when I think they went 5 games without conceding, picked up 4 victories in that time. They had a couple of poor results, but again, they were against sides that you were kind of expecting to be up there towards the top of the table. And then they beat Charlton last time out. So you've got sides in there that, as I say, very good outfits. And Exeter as well are a very good side. Joe Whitworth in goal, very, very good young keeper. So particularly, yeah, you're looking at a game that probably isn't going to have the greatest amount of goals. Might well finish 0-0. It's just up to Lincoln to try and create that threat up top. And you've got the forwards of Bailey Cadamartri, Ben House, Jovan Makama, and in all fairness, it's quite difficult to see who will start up top at the moment for Lincoln, because there are those options. It's more defensively at the moment that Lincoln have slightly struggling a little bit with injuries. So from that perspective, you're looking at a game that we expect to be very, very well fought and extremely tight.
I've taken 5 goals out of the Exeter side in all competitions this season. Lincoln City's recognised strikers have scored 17 goals, which is phenomenal. I mean, it's across 5 or 6 players, but it's phenomenal for November. Now, one area that Lincoln do like to expose is set pieces. Scored more set pieces than anybody else in the division. Exeter are actually 7th in the division, having scored 8 set pieces. But of the 10 goals that they've conceded, 4 have been from set pieces. Is that how Lincoln beat Exeter this week? Is set pieces? Is that where you see the difference being?
Yeah, I think it's got to be. Bailey Cadamartri scored in midweek from a corner. It's only the EFL Trophy, but we know that Lincoln have been very strong in that area, particularly when you've got players like that. Your defenders as well. O'Connor, I know Jackson's been injured, but there is definitely that height in there. There is definitely that ability to put balls in the box, and Lincoln are gonna threaten from them sort of areas. And Exeter are gonna have to be very, very wary of that and try and nullify that threat. And we always speak about Lincoln lack of possession. So again, you'd expect Exeter to have more of the ball. But yeah, as I say, it's just about Exeter trying to stop that threat. Maybe try and concede less corners, stay on the ball, keep possession more so, and go from there.
So we'll move down into League 2 now, and you talk about soaking up pressure. The first game that we've picked is it looks on paper to be an absolute banker. It's Port Vale top versus Morecambe bottom. Now, this is the one that you've pulled out the bag, so I'm going to be really interested to see quite what you've got to say on it. We talk about possession, actually. Port Vale only tend to have 49% possession in their games, Morecambe 43%. So neither of these teams tend to dominate possession, but one of them is dominating in terms of goals, wins and league table, and the other one absolutely isn't. What is it that's piqued your interest about this game, Kyle?
Well, obviously from the outside looking in, you look at it's top versus bottom. So as you say, it's kind of on paper, you'd go, well, Port Vale are going to absolute steamroll. Morecambe have had a little bit of an upturn in form. They tend to, the cup competition tended to suit them better this season. Through to the next round of the FA Cup, I believe they've got Bradford at the end of the month. Through their EFL Trophy group, I know they lost in midweek, but still progression there. And they did beat Harrogate last time out, another side who were struggling at the bottom end of League Two. So from that sort of perspective, I'm looking at a game that's going to be quite difficult for Port Vale. And it's kind of what League Two is all about in some respects, that bottom can beat top, sorry. The league isn't always as it seems. And you've got a Port Vale side that were extremely good in October. I believe they won 5 out of the 6, 5 wins in a row. Did lose to Gillingham last time out, which is interesting. So they'll be hoping there's a response there. Some big wins as well. Not necessarily in terms of goals as much in October, but against the teams who are playing, so you had like the likes of Notts County, MK Dons, and then sort of Wimbledon we know struggle more so away from home than at home, but you've still got Harrogate, Fleetwood sides are struggling. So it's sort of that perspective that I'm really looking forward to see how Port Vale fare this week against a struggling side, and to whether they can be as good as they have been in the past.
What I find really interesting looking at Morecambe, and obviously they were a League One side up until very recently. They're actually something like 17th in the division for XG. So whilst they on paper look like they're particularly struggling, their XG is higher than the likes of Tranmere, Salford, Crewe, Cheltenham, Harrogate, Barrow, Carlisle, even Grimsby, who are doing relatively well. What is it that Morecambe need to do to make it click? Can they avoid dropping out of the Football League?
I think when you've got a manager like Derek Adams, particularly his comments actually after Harrogate, I was really quite impressed with. He was speaking about the togetherness of the group and trying to rally together. And when you're stuck in a relegation battle, that's what you need. You need to stick together in order to pick up points. And as I say, that they are obviously struggling. The table doesn't lie, but they are only a couple of points from safety at the moment. So you're looking at hopefully trying to pick up points, and not everyone plays in the division this weekend. There's only a couple of games that have been called off, but hopefully this is the start of a turning point in terms of winning last weekend. And as I say, I think there was an FA Cup victory at the start of the month against Worthing, and we've spoken before, I think, about Burton and using that FA Cup game, turning the tide, starting to pick up results, and that's what they have done. I think they won their first league game after that. So again, with Morecambe, you're hoping for that sort of cup games can sort of be your parachute to start moving forward and pick up results. And as I say, this is not going to be an easy game at all. Port Vale have been excellent, and there's some really top teams at the top of the division at the moment. You look at the likes of Notts County, Crewe, Doncaster, and Port Vale sit top because they've been the best team in the division. There's no doubt about that, and they've got some very, very good players in there. But I'm expecting a very difficult game on Saturday for them.
Yeah, very interesting. You talk there about cup games looking to turn momentum, and that brings us on to our third game of the weekend, which is Colchester United versus Bradford City. The reason I say cup games turning momentum is because Colchester went into their midweek game against Arsenal under-21s without a win in 9. They picked up a 3-0 win on that occasion, so it's their first win there in 10. That's something that hopefully they're going to be looking to carry forward into their game against Bradford City. Now, Colchester are struggling. They're 21st in the division at the minute. But the reason I wanted to talk about it is some of their underlying numbers actually are not that bad. They're 15th in XG. Okay, it's not top half, but it's certainly better than the position that they were in. They're actually 6th for touches in the area this season in League One, which is higher than Bradford. Of those 9 games that they didn't win, 6 of those were draws, 2 of them, albeit in the Cup, when they lost 2-1 to Swindon, I think, in extra time, played Leyton Orient in a Football League Trophy. The losses, one of them, aside from the 4-0 against Walsall, were narrow losses, 2-1 at home to Cheltenham and 2-1 at home to Salford. So they look like they're in a little bit of a false position. They've had some issues with injuries. Anthony Scully, who they signed on loan, they've had to send back to Portsmouth, with Danny Cowley lamenting the short time period he had to sign him after to bring him in as a replacement. They have got leading scorer Lyle Taylor back this weekend. I think he scored 5 goals in 8 starts for them. So he'll be going up against the division's leading scorer in Andy Cook. Everything I kind of talk about and see around Colchester suggests that they should be mid-table, just looking to cling on to the playoffs. But that's actually where Bradford are, and Colchester are struggling. How do you see this one, Kyle?
Well, I think this is certainly an interesting matchup between, as you say, two sides that perhaps should be closer in the table than is suggested. Bradford had a decent run of games in October, picked up some points, and then have dropped off. Lost to Fleetwood last time out, lost to Doncaster in a game that was kind of seen as a real measure of where they are, because Doncaster are a top side in the division. They lost that day. Drawn against Cheltenham as well, which wasn't a bad point, all things considered. But I do want to pick up on both strikers, as you've said. Andy Cook, excellent, very, very good at this level, has been for many years. I think even last season there was bits of frustration. I remember watching him play Notts County, and I think that day could have had a hat-trick. I don't know if he even got on the... I think Matt scored once. But he's an excellent player. You know what you're going to get with him. Scoring goals. Similarly with Lyle Taylor, done it at a higher level. He will be crucial, particularly if he's back starting on Saturday for Colchester. And I know, as I said, you look at the position of Colchester, you go, well, there might be a bit of pressure on Danny Cowley. There isn't, by all accounts. I see a lot of fans wanting to back him. As we spoke earlier, saying about Gareth Ainsworth, Danny Cowley is the epitome of a manager coming in, transforming a club, wanting to get close with the fans, the community, everything about Colchester that you would want. So you're hoping he's in this for the long term, and this might be the start of a sort of a run they could go on, a catalyst for a result, as we've said a couple of games this weekend. And from that, they can hopefully use this and start, as you say, them statistics. They don't lie. They perhaps should be higher in the table than they are. And if they can pick up a result this weekend and go on a little bit of a run, you go in towards Christmas, they might be able to get reinforcements in. We all know about Anthony Scully and his injury issues there. So hopefully they will be able to get players potentially in the January transfer window, or alternatively, players that perhaps are performing okay at the moment, they might be able to get performing much better. And if there's a manager that's going to do that, it will be under Danny Cowley. So it's a game on paper that would point towards a Bradford win. I actually think Colchester might nick this one.
I mean, the two teams are quite evenly matched in terms of home and away. Colchester have picked up 8 points at home. Bradford have picked up 8 points away. But actually, Bradford are without a win in 3 in the division now. Drew with Cheltenham, lost to Doncaster and lost to Fleetwood. So it does look like a relatively even matchup. And again, much like League One, whilst in terms of points there is a little bit of a difference, anyone can really beat anyone on the day, can't they? I think if the numbers and if the players are right and the players are fit and that sort of thing. And I think there is a feeling at Colchester that maybe they are moving towards a little bit of something. I was chatting to one of their fans after the Arsenal game, and although it's only the EFL Trophy and although it was only Arsenal under 21s, it does give the club a little bit of a lift. It gives certain players a little bit of a lift as well, obviously, when they're kind of getting on the score sheet and all that sort of stuff. Just as a kind of an aside, because Lincoln got their biggest win in the EFL Trophy in midweek as well, and Exeter have traditionally put weakened sides out and been absolutely thrashed in the EFL Trophy a couple of seasons ago. It's a competition that Football League fans watching this will probably start booing when I talk it up. But is it important now with bigger squads and player fitness and all that sort of thing? And certainly, does it play a part in motivation as well?
Yeah, I definitely think it can be great for sort of morale. And the opposite as well, as you say, Colchester can use that as a first win, when you're not winning games, it's very, very frustrating. And you're looking for that first win wherever it comes. I know, obviously, if you said, do you want to win in the EFL Trophy or in the league, you will snap your hand off for a league win any day of the week. But you've got to get a win somewhere. You've got to get the points in the trophy in terms of getting progression. And yeah, I know a lot of clubs don't take it seriously, and fan bases even less so. That was an interesting point. I think the attendance in midweek was quite high at Colchester. I think it was over 4,000. Given, I don't know if, when I saw that, I don't know if it was a mistake, because I was quite surprised to see an attendance that high. Similarly with Lincoln, I think it was about 3,000 in midweek, which obviously are not near their average for the league, but are higher than a lot of teams tend to get in the competition. And in the past, the EFL Trophy was always that sort of, you might get a game at Wembley, which Lincoln did. Plenty of teams don't get that chance in the lower league. So that is what the competition's about. And we can speak for days about the academy sides in it. And you've got the National League Cup now with the academy sides as well, which has kind of come out of nowhere and has, again, been heavily, heavily criticised. But it is very important, as you say, for squad rotation, getting players minutes. When you look at Lincoln as well, with the amount of strikers they've got, getting Rob Street minutes, you had Zane Okoro getting his first goal in professional football. They're very, very important for that. And yeah, when you've got bigger squads, you've got to keep players happy. So going further in competitions, it gives you a chance to keep players ticking over. And you've got players coming back from injuries as well. It's a great way to blood players back in and get them up to first team fitness. So there will always be differences, and everyone can have their own opinion about the EFL Trophy. And I personally don't like the fact that academy sides in. I think the majority of people don't, but it is still very, very important.
You're quite right. Just looking at the attendance, it was 4,265 with 1,120 Arsenal fans making the trip. So I suppose with it being relatively close and these bigger clubs, there's a lot of support for the under-21 sides as well. So really interesting. So Kyle, let's finish on some predictions. First of all, Exeter versus Lincoln.
I'm going to go for 1-1.
I'm going to go for 0-0. Port Vale versus Morecambe.
I'm going to go for a narrow Port Vale win, 2-1.
I'm going to go for a 3-0 Port Vale win. And finally, Colchester versus Bradford.
Well, as I said, I do believe Colchester might nick this game, so I'm going to go for a 1-0.
And I'm going to go 1-1. Look, everybody, thank you for joining us once again for an episode of the Real EFL League One and League Two show. I am Gary Hutchinson. That's Kyle Keneally. Before you log off, please remember to like and subscribe to the channel, like the video, all that sort of jazz, which helps us get up the algorithms. We will be back next week where we'll be looking at 3 more fixtures and maybe the Major News headline, if there is any. Hopefully, it will be a massive Lincoln record win. But failing that, we'll see you next week. Thanks a lot and bye.